Okay, thank you everybody for coming to what is actually our very first Zoom Sunday seminar. So we're very excited to be able to continue what we had been doing in person for such a long time and finding new ways to present it and also be able to open it up to more people. So it's my honor to introduce Kathryn Hickey, and she's going to lead us in a discussion about sustainability, which I think is a really important and relevant topic for our world today. So without further ado, I will give you Kathryn.
Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Kathryn Hickey. I just want to thank you all for coming here today. I know that many of us are on Zoom practically daily, and it can get pretty tiring. So I appreciate you all coming. If you would not mind muting yourself, your microphone during the presentation, that would be appreciated, just so that we don't have any background noise distracting anyone. I had already mentioned that this is already being recorded, so just keep that in mind. If you are calling in on a telephone, I will be sharing a little presentation, but I'll be going over everything verbally, so you won't miss out on anything. Don't worry about that. All right, so let me just share my screen. All right. So I am just going to start with a little introduction for myself. My name is Kathryn Hickey. I am a freshman at Dickinson College. I have previously been a part of and co-leaded my high school's Environmental Action Club. I've also been a part of my town's beautification and environmental committee, and I am currently an eco-rep at my college. So what is an eco-rep? At Dickinson, eco-reps are selected individuals who are dedicated to learning about the environment, and they're also dedicated to educating their peers and raising awareness on topics such as environmental sustainability, social justice, and economic opportunity. This semester looked a little different than most semesters. We were completely virtual. Normally, we would host in-person events to promote educating and raising awareness. However, that was not possible for this semester. So instead, we came up with this campaign called People, Planet, Prosperity, Skills for Change. And this campaign, we all highlighted 5 specific behaviors that would reduce carbon emissions on an individual level. And so each eco-rep took one of these behaviors and expanded upon it through some individual project. Some people did videos, other people made infographics. For example, I wrote a blog post about how to reduce carbon emissions through electricity usage, which would apply to the behavior turn off lights and unplug. The other behaviors were 1, walk, bike, and ride share. Then build a plant-rich diet, purchase consciously, turn off lights and unplug, and reduce food waste / compost. And I'll be discussing these behaviors in more depth later on in the presentation. I just wanted to mention them now. But before that, I would like to talk a little bit about the difference between global warming and climate change, and why it's important to know that difference. Oftentimes, the terms global warming and climate change are used interchangeably. They are related, however, there is a difference. So for global warming, that is the increase in the global temperature. And this is due to the burning of fossil fuels. As humans, we have been burning fossil fuels for energy for a while now. But when we burn fossil fuels, they release these gases called greenhouse gases, and that affects our ozone layer. The ozone layer is this protective layer around the Earth's surface, around the Earth, that protects us from solar radiation. And what greenhouse gases do is they allow more solar radiation to come into the Earth's atmosphere. And since that Earth's atmosphere is absorbing more of greenhouse gases, that increases the Earth's temperature, hence global warming. Climate change, on the other hand, is the long-term change in climate patterns. So climate can be thought of as the average weather in a given region. So for example, a desert. Any given day, it could rain. However, this is very unlikely. Normally, it's very hot, it's very arid. So the climate for a desert would be hot and arid as opposed to rainy or snowy or anything like that. So what we see is that global warming causes climate change. The increase in the global temperature due to the burning of fossil fuels is what causes our climate to change. So why is this important? Why does it matter if our Earth is a couple of degrees warmer? That shouldn't have much of an impact, but it does. That's the importance of it. The first thing that we have seen already happening due to our climate changing and the temperature changing is that icebergs and glaciers are melting. And when they melt, this rises the sea level. So that creates flooding issues and problems for cities at lower sea levels. We also have to keep in mind that climate change is not just a change in temperature, it's a change in the weather patterns. So not only are specific weather patterns going to occur more frequently, but they're going to be more severe when they do happen. So that's an increase in severity and frequency of hurricanes, cyclones, floods, droughts, and snowstorms. Some examples that we're already seeing today of these changes in weather patterns in India and Bangladesh, there is a lot more flooding. And in California and Australia, there were wildfires and more droughts this year than we have seen in the past. Going along with that, we can see from these weather changes and weather patterns that this is a direct impact not only on our societies, but also on wildlife. We can talk about how the coral reefs have been destroyed due to climate change, or how animals in Australia or everywhere are being hurt and killed because of these weather pattern changes. An important aspect to note is that deforestation is not helping our situation. Deforestation is when trees, either in a forest or a jungle or a rainforest, are cut down and they are not compensated for, meaning that these trees aren't replanted elsewhere or other trees aren't planted for the number of trees that were cut down. And the problem with this is that trees actually take in carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. So the more trees that we have, the less of an impact our greenhouse gas emissions will have on our atmosphere and on the global temperature. But once we get rid of these trees and we don't compensate for that, we have more of an effect of the greenhouse gases on our global temperature. So that temperature is going to rise and the climate will continue to change. Another important aspect to mention is that the climate will continue to change if we don't take action. So much so that at some point, the Earth will be inhabitable for humans to live on. Granted, that's going to take a while for that to happen, but the more that we do to prevent the climate from changing now, the better that is for the future, and the longer humans will be able to live on the planet. So now I'm going to talk about maybe behaviors or different tips that you can use in your daily life to be more sustainable and to fight climate change. And I'm first going to focus on the 5 specific behaviors that the Dickinson Eco-Reps focused on for reducing carbon emissions. And the first one of these is walk, bike, and ride share. So the less that we use vehicles that run on fossil fuels, the less fossil fuels we use and the less greenhouse gases we emit. So if you want to think of it as taking a bus, and maybe that bus has 20 people on it, that one bus is going to use less fossil fuels than if those 20 individuals each have their own car and we're using that. So that's going to use less fossil fuels, which then emits less greenhouse gases. That being said, I know it's COVID times and we're in a pandemic, so I would not recommend ride sharing right now. That being said, though, we can still walk and bike as long as the weather is permitting and we are able to do those things physically. But again, you don't have to necessarily stop using cars or vehicles that run on fossil fuels. Just try to be smart about your usage. If you can afford to take a 10-minute walk as opposed to a 2-minute car ride, try to do the walk, and just try to keep that in mind. The next behavior is to build a plant-rich diet. The meat industry produces a lot of greenhouse gases, emits a lot of greenhouse gases. The meat industry produces about 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions, which is a big chunk. So the less meat that we consume, the less we're contributing to that industry, which produces so much greenhouse gas emissions. And this isn't to say that you have to become vegetarian or vegan, that you have to cut meat out of your diet entirely. You just should try to reduce how much meat you're consuming. So maybe you can have meat for one meal a day or a couple times a week. That has a huge impact. So again, you don't have to cut meat entirely out of your diet. Also, I want to emphasize that a plant-rich diet doesn't necessarily mean eating salads all the time. This also means eating grains, so pasta, rice, bread, as well as vegetables and fruits. That's really important. The third behavior is to purchase consciously, and this really involves two parts. The first being you want to know where your product is coming from, and the second is that you want to know how your product was made. Sorry. You want to know how your product is made. So, for example, you might think about buying something locally, and that is a great option. Not only is this going to reduce your carbon emissions for how far you'll be traveling, but if it's made locally and produced locally, then it also didn't travel as far. It didn't go through as much production or processing or packaging, hopefully. That being said, I do want to mention that if you're hypothetically debating whether to buy a specific product from a local shop versus a large department store, and it's the same exact product made by the same company, it's just sold in two different places, that's not really going to have much of a difference in your emissions or contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, mainly because that piece of clothing, it went through the same processing, same packaging, same shipping to get to those locations. So it's not going to have that much of a difference. And you really want to keep in mind where that product was originally coming from. So was it made overseas in a factory that uses lots of fossil fuels, or was it made locally by local artisans who used natural fibers that weren't excessively processed? That's something really important to keep in mind. The next behavior is to turn off lights and unplug. This is referring to electricity usage. The electricity production in the United States makes up about 27% of all greenhouse gas emissions for the US, which is also a large amount. And this is not to tell you that you shouldn't be using electricity. I mean, we wouldn't be on this Zoom call if we weren't, but it's just to say that you should try to limit your use, or at least be smart about how much you use your electricity. So for example, you don't necessarily need to leave a light on in a room that you're not in. You can turn that off. Turn it on when you come into the room and turn it off when you leave. Another example is if you have a rechargeable device, like a cell phone or a laptop or anything like that. You don't necessarily need to charge it overnight for 6 to 8 hours. It probably only needs about 3 hours. So you can do that during the day And once it reaches 100% or full capacity, you can just unplug it and you won't be contributing as much or wasting any energy. The last behavior for the EcoRep specific behaviors is to reduce food waste / compost. So for this, if we reduce our food waste and we compost more, then less food and less waste will end up in the garbage. And that means less waste will be in landfills. The more waste that there is in landfills, no matter what it is, if it's food waste or some other type of waste, the more often those landfills will have to incinerate the waste to free up space. So if there's less food waste in landfills, then they won't have to incinerate as often. And the thing about incineration is that when you incinerate something, so you're burning it up, if something's made from fossil fuels, then you're going to be burning fossil fuels, which then emits those greenhouse gases. So if you can reduce that food waste and compost more, you'll not be contributing as much greenhouse gas emissions. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you, let's say you purchased some sort of food and you forgot about it and it got moldy, so you threw it out. Right in that action, you contributed to greenhouse gases without actually benefiting from your purchase. Let's say you bought, I don't know, a thing of cheese, packaged cheese. That cheese emitted greenhouse gases more than likely through its production, its processing, its packaging, its shipping to get to the store where you bought it from. So that all emitted greenhouse gases. And then you didn't even get to eat your cheese or enjoy your cheese. And now it's food waste, so it'll end up in a landfill. It'll be incinerated, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. So that's one way to think about it, just a little reminder to make sure that you keep track of all the food that you're purchasing and that you're using all that food. That's also going to save you money, which we all like to do. And I just want to mention for composting, I know that that can be very scary when, especially if you're a beginner and you don't really know everything about it. There are so many different methods and variations of composting, and that means that you can make it as simple and easy as you want it to be. You can try and dig a hole in your backyard and throw food scraps in there, or if you want, you can purchase a compost bin. There are actually local community gardens oftentimes that will collect your food scraps, and they'll use that and compost it themselves to use in the community garden. So I would suggest trying to see if your town or your local DPW has a community garden. That's a great way if you don't really want to get too crazy into composting, but you still want to reduce your food waste. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in these 5 specific behaviors to check out the EcoReps Instagram account, which is CSE_Dickinson. That's all lowercase. I'll say it one more time, CSE_Dickinson. We also have a webpage on the Dickinson College website, if that is easier for you to look at. And it has all the same information on there as well. So now I'll be talking about some behaviors or some tips that don't necessarily fit into those 5 specific behaviors. And the first one is the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. So this is a saying that many elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools have actually adopted in recent years to get kids to start thinking about their environmental impact and their actions. So a lot of schools heavily emphasize the last R, which is recycle, and that's great. Recycling is great, but I want to emphasize that the 3 R's are in a specific order for a reason. They're listed in order of importance. So first, we want to reduce what we use. Then we want to reuse whatever we do use. And for whatever we can't reduce out of our lives and we can't reuse it, we should try to recycle it. So in this kind of mindset, you're not only relying on recycling. Recycling, as I said, is a great thing. However, it's not always practical. Oftentimes it's cheaper and just easier to throw something out as opposed to recycle it, either due to its shape or the different numbers on the recycling, the different numbers on the product. Different towns accept different numbers in that triangle. So that can get a little complicated. So if you can reduce your waste or reduce what you use and then try to reuse what you can, as opposed to just recycling, that'll have a great impact. That being said, I do want to recognize the fact that reducing and reusing can be quite difficult, especially in our current society, and that in order to go completely zero waste free, that takes a lot of not only dedication, but financial means, and that's not an option for everyone, and that's fine. That's not, you shouldn't feel bad about not being able to go completely zero waste. Just try to reduce what you can and reuse what you can and recycle, in that order. The next tip is to support campaigns that are dedicated to the environment. This is a huge thing. On an individual level, there is a lot that we can do, and we can really make a difference. But if only a handful of people are doing those things, it's not going to have much of an effect if there are hundreds of people that aren't. So by supporting campaigns, you can help educate a larger population of people, as well as implement policy changes, which is really important in getting people to adhere to different guidelines, as well as just getting the word out there. And I want to emphasize that supporting campaigns doesn't necessarily mean donating to campaigns. It can mean that if you want it to be, but it can also be just talking to other people, spreading the word about an organization that you feel is doing the right thing. It can be sharing the word on social media. It can be signing petitions. It doesn't just have to be donating, although donating does help if you are able to do that. The last tip I'm going to give is to do some of your own research and talk to other people. Not only are you going to be learning more, but you're also going to inspire learning in others. And that's such an important part of being sustainable. You want others to want to be sustainable. You don't want to force them. Because if you force someone to do something, they're just going to do the bare minimum. And if you inspire someone to want to be sustainable, then they're going to be inspired to teach others the same thing as well. So really, by getting one person to want to be sustainable, you're going to get 10 or 20 more people along the way. So that's really important. And lastly, I just want to say that not every tip is for everyone. You should do what works for you and adjust what doesn't. And going along with this, I just want to say that you shouldn't necessarily judge people or reprimand them for not being sustainable. Sometimes people just don't know, or they don't have the means to be sustainable in a particular area, whether it's financial or personal reasons or other reasons. And it's important to keep that in mind and to talk to them, try to figure out why they aren't being sustainable in that way, why they should be sustainable in that way, and how they can be sustainable given their circumstances. And I just want to say that this presentation also was not meant to shame or blame you or make you feel bad about not being sustainable in a particular area. It was just to hopefully bring light to some areas in your life where you maybe aren't being the most sustainable, and you can try to be more sustainable. And don't beat yourself up if you're not 100% sustainable all the time. In our current day and age, it's extremely difficult, and it takes a lot of time, dedication, and effort, and sometimes financial means. So don't beat yourself up about it. It's okay. Just that all of you came onto this call to learn a little bit and to have an important discussion about the environment and our climate, I think is really important, and it speaks for itself. So now I'll be opening up the conversation to any questions or discussions. Feel free to unmute yourself or to type in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, so hopefully we can have more of a face-to-face conversation. But I hope you all learned something or took something away from this.
Question: when you say turn off and unplug, if an appliance is off but still plugged in, is it using electricity?
It depends on the appliance. Oftentimes it will be using electricity. It will flow through the appliance, and those appliances are often referred to as ghost appliances because, like you said, they're not on, but they're still using energy. If you can unplug, that would be a great thing. However, if it's maybe in a difficult to reach spot or it just is impractical, I would suggest power strips that have the little switch off. If that switch is off, then electricity isn't running through it, and the appliance is no longer a ghost appliance.
Kathryn, can you maybe talk about the types of food waste that you can compost? Because I think there are certain things you should not compost.
Right. It all depends on the type of composting that you're doing. For example, some people do compost meat scraps while others do not. The reason behind not doing this, a lot of people, it might attract animals and they don't want them destroying either their bin or getting into their garden, things like that. For other people, it's not as much of an issue. Others don't compost citrus because that can create a bit of a more acidic acid, sorry, not acid, acidic soil. And that's not necessarily good for all plants. However, depending on what type of plants you want to use the soil for, it really depends. Still, others might compost dairy products, others don't, similar reasons for attracting animals. So really it depends on what type of compost that you would prefer to do. And if it's a situation where you're collecting scraps for a community garden, they will have guidelines about what you should and should not bring.
Hi, Kathryn, I have two quick questions.
Sure.
The first one is, this is a personal one. Do houseplants factor into aiding the fight against greenhouse emissions? Because I have a whole house full of plants. And the second question is, do you have any thoughts about how being eco-friendly is a response to God calling us to be good stewards of our planet?
Great questions. I'll start with the first one. So houseplants definitely do help a little bit in the combat of climate change because they are still taking in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis to create their energy. So that definitely helps. It's going to be more about keeping your personal space more clean and better air quality as opposed to a global sense because a little houseplant isn't going to take in as much carbon dioxide as a whole forest of big trees is going to. But that being said, houseplants are definitely great and helpful in that way. And for the second question, I think that, you know, God created this earth with the intention for humans to live on it and to live with one another for as long as we can. And the thing with climate change that is scary is that that isn't a guarantee. We're not always going to be on Earth. And I think by combating climate change, we'll be doing God's will in the sense that will elongate the time that people will be able to live on God's Earth. And I think that's really important.
Thank you.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Are there any tips that you've gone over some tips of what people from our congregation and just people in the world can do on their own at home to be eco-friendly? Is there any tips that you have for our church, like the church building, about how it could be more sustainable?
Yeah, I think that we would have to do more of a in-depth, I guess, research on how like our electricity usage is when we're not there, like if lights are still on when people leave or if we turn them off, kind of thing, little things like that. I know that we have motion sensor lights in like the bathrooms, so that's helpful to make sure that lights aren't on and aren't using energy. Paper usage, I know that we have bulletins and we have been transitioning to more of an electronic format. Not that we have to go completely paperless. I think that going electronic could help in reducing the amount of paper that we use. I know that there have been a few, not issues, but concerns about going paperless, and I understand that. I think we just have to transition into it slowly and gradually if we decide to do that. But I think those are two areas that we can definitely look into, as well as if anyone has any other suggestions.
Kathryn, this is Barbara speaking. I just think it's absolutely wonderful what you're doing, and I just loved your presentation. And I just feel so bad when I see pictures of the icebergs melting and the way things are progressing. And what you're doing is just fantastic. Thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that you were able to come in and hear some of this and hopefully learn something too.
Kathryn, I think what's so great about your presentation is that it's so realistic. You know, sometimes it can be so pie in the sky that people find they don't keep attention because they just, it just seems beyond. But I think you've done a great job of bringing it down to you know, things that can easily be taken into account and acted upon. And I think it's really appreciated. So I want to thank you for how you approached all of this. You did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely easy to, the effects of climate change are definitely long-term effects. But once you bring those effects into a more personal level and you see the short-term effects that are already happening now, I think that's really influential. I'm sorry, did someone say something?
Kathryn, dear, I just wanted to say that I found it extremely interesting and very, very well presented. And I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. New Jersey is putting through, I believe, a law about the plastic bags no longer going to be being used. And someone was talking at the food store yesterday that eventually they think the stores are not going to supply any kind of bags, that they'll want to promote the reusable bags that you just bring with you each time. Do you know when that law takes effect, or you think that will have a big impact by the stores not having all the plastic bags?
I am pretty sure that that goes into effect starting 2021. I'm not entirely sure what month, but I believe spring 2021. I do think that that will have a huge impact. Plastic is made from fossil fuels. So anytime that you make anything plastic related, you're going to be emitting greenhouse gases. So the less production of plastic bags, the less greenhouse gases will be emitted, which I think is a huge thing. Also with reusable bags, you get to reuse them, which is great that you're not that you don't have to recycle, or you don't have to rely on recycling. I think that there is definitely going to be some resistance to switching to only reusable bags, because that means you have to purchase them, and you don't even have the option to use the paper bags or the plastic bags, which technically can be recycled. I think in the long run it will be beneficial, but I do understand why people would want to resist that initially.
You know, Paramus has already gone
Yes.
totally paper.
Mm-hmm.
And Catherine, I live in Asbury Park, and we started in the city of Asbury Park last year. No plastic bags in the stores, and the stores are not giving out, in some cases, paper bags. You have to bring your own.
Yeah.
And so far, it's the beaches are much cleaner. It's made a big difference.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to hear.
Just out of
Catherine,
curiosity,
I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, just out of curiosity, has your group also sort of tackled the issue of public policy in a more systematic way? Are there public policy positions that we should be supporting? And actually, to Dwayne's point, is it, as Christians, should we be a little more forceful in condemning climate change denial? So things like that.
I think a difficult thing with combating people who are in denial of climate change is that this kind of mindset of when you give facts to someone who is really strongly rooted against them, even presenting them facts and data, they're still going to deny it. So I think it's really important that not that we don't waste time on naysayers, but that we focus on the bigger picture as opposed to single individuals who aren't accepting of the idea of climate change. So I think policy changes in that aspect, that's really important because that enforces a larger population and spreading awareness to a larger group of people. I'm sorry, you had two questions. What was the other part?
I kind of blurred them together.
Okay.
No, I just was wondering whether your group is also involved just in studying public policy positions and advocating for that.
Yeah, there are individuals in our group who have actually started, I guess, a campaign of their own, which is called Divest Dickinson, and that is to get the Dickinson College itself completely off of using fossil fuels for energy to only use renewable sources of energy. We also were able to get the college to be completely carbon neutral. That being said, carbon neutral doesn't mean that we don't produce any carbon emissions. It just means that we offset them so that our net carbon emissions are equal to zero. And I believe we're one of 20 colleges that have been able to achieve that in the United States. And I know that a large portion of that is due to the eco reps, as well as we have a center for sustainability education. As for like government area, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure about that, but I know for the college itself, we've had a lot of change.
Good.
I had a question. You hear more and more people are now getting electric cars or hybrid cars. How does that impact sustainability on the planet?
I think that electric cars are definitely a good option because it's switching from using a non-renewable source, so gasoline is considered non-renewable, to a more renewable source. And there is the debate of, our electricity in the United States is produced from fossil fuels. So going from a vehicle that runs on gasoline, which is made from fossil fuels, to going to an electric car that still technically is on fossil fuels. It's a different type of emissions. Electric cars don't emit as much, since when you charge it, charging a car is going to use less fossil fuels than if you're actually driving a car that's running off of gasoline. So I think that electric cars are a great way to go. That being said, they are expensive, and it's not, at least in the US, it's not a requirement, or there isn't a policy that says that we have to go to electric cars anytime soon. So many people aren't right now. But I think that can definitely be a change in the future.
And I had a quick comment. I can tell you, for many, many years, this has been very important for Kathryn. She's been a big time evangelist of this, and this started several years ago. I can remember her, she and her sister Alyssa, at high school, they didn't have recycling in her school, and they would bring home their friends plastic bottles and cans and things like that, and we'd recycle them at our house. So she'd come home with this big backpack of things. So she knows what, this is very near and dear to her heart. So I'm glad she's got to speak about this. I had two questions. One, can you tell us a little bit about using like LED lights and how that would help reduce electricity and cost? And secondly, you talked about using more, eating more plants and you depending less on the meat industry. Is eating fish, where does that fall? I know it's a different industry.
Sure. So for the first question, LED lights. LED lights are more energy efficient, so they don't use as much energy as your, I guess, normal light bulbs would. So they save energy, and they are supposed to last much longer. So you wouldn't have to go through as many light bulbs, so that's less waste, which we really like. And then for the second question, the fish industry, there is some, I guess, debate about it, depending on if you're getting farm-raised fish or wild fish. The thing with wild fish is that since there's so much pollution and plastic in the ocean, we've seen that when plastic starts to break down, it becomes very small pieces of plastic called microplastics, and fish will eat this. Even before plastic starts breaking down, some types of plastic look like food that fish or other aquatic animals would normally eat. So if you're getting wild fish, there is a possibility that it can contain plastic in it. And if you eat that, then you're eating plastic. So that isn't necessarily that's not a good thing. But then with farm raising fish, they're, through the processing, there's also going to be greenhouse gases emitted. Not as much as more of like beef, sorry, beef and chicken. But there still will be more emissions than plants. So it's definitely a good option. I know many vegetarians who are vegetarian for environmental sakes that do eat fish, and they're okay with that. It's really a personal decision. But I think that eating more fish than beef or chicken or turkey is definitely a good option.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions for Kathryn? If not, then I want to, on behalf of Christian Ed, say thank you to all of you for coming. I'm very glad that we've had such good attendance on our first virtual Sunday seminar, and I can say that there'll be more to come. Our next one will be in January, and it'll be on preventing scams, and it will be with a member of the Hackensack Police Department. And I believe that'll be January 10th, also at 1 p.m. on Zoom. I'll send more information about that as it gets closer. But again, thank you for coming. And if we could all give Kathryn a huge round of applause, and thank you for her presentation.
Yay, Kathryn!
Thank you.
Kudos, kudos.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. I'm going to stop recording now.